Greetings, family. This is Yapo Moyende Ngina, otherwise known as the Rogue Black Girl, and I have great news for this evening. I am going to finish this book on this day. Okay? So get ready. Stay awake if you can. I know it's really late on the East Coast right now. It's about 9:30 Pacific Standard Time. But I came home in a mood. And I was like, damn it, I'm finishing this book this night. That's all there is to it. Even if I'm by myself doing it, that's what's happening. So the book that I am referring to, for those of you who've been devout in tuning in and listening and watching with me, is the wonderful, the great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Soju and Barbara Moore. I am reading the last two chapters this evening. Hey now, Vicky, thank you for tuning in. So we're going to get started. Last night's chapter was off the hook. I had to reread the whole chapter today because it was so good, right? I'm giving y'all gold. I'm giving y'all like real gems. So this next to the last chapter is called The Magic Flight Home. In the name of God, what patriarchy has finally achieved is the completely profane world. What Western patriarchy has given us, in God's name, is a world wholly emptied of spirit. The wholly desacralized cosmos is a recent discovery in the history of the human spirit. For the human spirit and the spiritual world existed from the beginning, as consciousness is a property of matter. And evolution is the play of spirit. Wow. By abstracting spirit from flesh, by utterly demonizing the physical world and woman as its source, patriarchy has almost destroyed the home of spirit, which is sacred earth and all flesh. In its place, patriarchy has built a sordid wasteland of material products, profit, and power systems, and death machines, the inevitable result of 4,000 years of militant life-hatred and cynical mercantilism. Our earthly bodies themselves are mechanized and pornographized, offered up for sale as though indeed we had no souls, but existed only as exploitable units in a nihilistic market and state systems. Whether we are women or men, we are all for sale in the modern world, all whores for our own survival. In the final insult, the religious fundamentalists tell us the price tags attached to our necks and groins are not travesties at all, but come from God, a God who somehow, in their mercenary sermonizing, becomes the original capitalist. And of course, they are right. Their God was the first to own, control, and exploit the human female as productive property, as a head of cattle, i.e., capital. Today, as at its beginnings, patriarchy pretends to teach us about our souls and offers us spiritual salvation. In truth, patriarchy has never done anything but steal and exploit the human soul, just as, from its beginnings in mass bloodshed, repression, and plunder, it has for 4 millennia robbed and exploited the energies of Earth and all her creatures. By setting itself against evolution, i.e., against the continuous epiphany of biological consciousness, patriarchy has set itself against life itself. For 4,000 years, it has plundered, pushed, and plotted its way toward the complete construction of a substitute life, an ersatz Earth, a la global shopping mall, a man-made mechanical paradise, ignoring, denying, and insulting the cosmic laws of everything growing and alive. It develops mechanoid specializations in every sphere, supposedly for our benefit. It destroys or overrides integrated living processes to turn out metalloid and plastoid things, deadened things which correspondingly humanoid things are supposed to spend our eerie lives buying and consuming. But we should know by now that human life engineered as an extension of a mechanoid vision is to the benefit of no one, except the owners of the machine. The industries and technologies of both Western capitalism and Soviet statism cannot exist without earth rape. Y'all better hear what I'm telling you. The industries and technologies of both Western capitalism and Soviet statism cannot exist without earth rape, gross pollution of the environment, exterminations of vast numbers of animals and humans, and jungles and forests and grasslands, massive die-outs of terrestrial and ocean life forms, because systematic destruction is a function of the original patriarchal premises. Exploit for power and profit. What can be done under patriarchy to one female body can be done under world patriarchy to the entire body of the earth. The pornographic images of women trussed up in chains and barbed wire, of female flesh bruised and bloodied and beaten raw, are really our species' maps of the mutilated earth, who for 4,000 years has been tortured for power and profit. The deadness of pornography is the deadness of the landscape created by patriarchy, in which nothing lives that is not hideously deformed, controlled, manipulated for the voyeur's eyes, bound up for use. In such a landscape, the classical patriarchal paranoia becomes well justified. Earth becomes indeed an ugly, hellish place in which ugly, hellish things can be done to us. Mother Earth can refuse to respond to our need and instead begin to match our destructiveness with her own destructions. In response, the man says not to worry and regales us with his plans for a wholly programmed artificial life. It would be such a great improvement over the natural life, which was so encumbered with mess and error. Grass will be replaced with astroturf. Hearts will be replaced with computers. And on the market right now are fluffy, purring, meowing robot pussycats, which can do all the things cute real house cats can do, catch mice, without the cost and bother. In fact, everything can be replaced, including us, with those good, efficient, obedient, non-unionized, thoroughly dreamless machines. For those still attached to the sentiment of flesh, biological engineers are probing inward with an eye to reprogramming our own DNA, to emulate perhaps our varieties as well as our mistakes, all with a vision of making us more perfect, which classically means more usable within terms of a specific system. For those who still gaze at stars, the man is launching out in all directions, eager to carry all these circuit boards of God to other planets and other galaxies. In all the plans to colonize space, there is a remarkable but predictable absence of any profound urge to contradict or challenge an extant patriarchal definition of the meaning of life. Moons and planets will become colonized resource stations. Male and female astronauts, or the androids that replace them, will communicate with each other, with earthlings, and with galaxies in only the most linear, digitalized, and computational language. Regardless of their siliconic sophistication, the more humans rely on machines, the more we become extensions of machines. Woo! The mechanoid processes meant to, quote, free us are instead defining us. In his boyish enthusiasm for his own inventiveness, the man has once again thoroughly missed the point, which is this: only fully living beings can fully experience life. For those of us left earthbound, we live on a dying planet, a planet undergoing prolonged torture, that is, a huge, fully sentient creature being subjected to an infinite variety of murders. She is dynamited. She is strip mined. She is gassed and sprayed with chemicals. She is riddled with whales seeking oil, her blood, determined to suck out the last black drop. Her brain, which is the sea, is dumped full of poison. The air through which she breathes becomes a thick, toxic cloud. All the heavy metals and radioactive elements, once distributed sparsely throughout her body, are now leached into her bones, into her fleshy soil, into her womb, stored in lethal concentrations, drunk by roots, groundwater, tongues. They will pass down a more than necessary death to her remaining creatures for generations to come. A humanity starved of energy eats its own mother. Meanwhile, nature's free and relatively wholesome holistic energies of sun, wind, thermal heat, water, moon tidal, human, and organic compost are ignored, even rejected. Not that they are non-feasible, but that manhood in the Western world is defined as large-scale exploitation rather than local cooperation. Whoo! Yes. Let me read that last sentence again. Not that these things are non-feasible, but that manhood in the Western world is defined as large-scale exploitation rather than social cooperation. The Western world, as we all know, is a total junkie, both in its compulsive addiction to consumption and its foul methods of disposing of its wastes. The number one drug problem in America surely is the 24-hour-a-day addiction of the average person to 100 times more artificial energy, from sugar to electricity, from mass entertainment to the bomb, than any healthy human being could ever want or need. And like any junkie threatened with a cutoff of supply, America, the Western world generally, can think and act in murderous ways. The Western world feels it is constantly threatened with having its physical power sources cut off. In response, if current political economic trends are indicative, it will euphemistically institute and maintain a total dictatorship of the globe in order to maintain access to energy sources which are, by most accounts, already dwindling. The alternative for the West is a complete change of worldview and lifestyle. But how is such a total change possible within the terms of patriarchal ontology? Ooh, shit. The Western patriarchies cannot change in any radical way. Because they are ontologically based on a cutting off of the human roots. The patriarchal West cannot solve its energy problems because our minds and spirits were long ago cut off from the real cosmic ecstasy. Sorry about that. The patriarchal West cannot solve its energy problems because our minds and spirits were long ago cut off from the real source of energy, our creative power. This is the sexual, spiritual source of cosmic ecstasy, which patriarchy has denied in favor of manipulative, moralistic, and rationalistic energies. And as moral and rational energies themselves dwindle within a lingering patriarchal framework, only the most decadent, bizarre, and vicious energies seem to erupt in their place. These criminal energies do not result from the absence of patriarchy, as the fundamentalists preach. Rather, they are the corrupt residues and grotesque spasms of the denying patriarch himself. Evil is that which prevents the unfolding of the one. According to this definition, surely all of the patriarchal society is evil. Even in the death throes, it attempts to pit us all against each other as economic enemies, as political enemies, as racial enemies, as religious enemies, worker against worker, white against dark, man against woman, belief against belief, as patriarchal systems begin and end by instigating competitiveness for survival, i.e., by trying to make communalism, mutual cooperation, impossible. Ironically, even the minimal cooperation required to keep patriarchal systems going seems to be rapidly dwindling. Against the unfolding of the one, against the revelation of our oneness, patriarchy schemes ferociously to pit us against each other like many rats in a small cage, like many hungry dogs thrown only one bone. If we have to keep surviving at one another's expense, we will of course never learn or never remember how to live in the hope of one another's well-being. Oh God, oh, 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 oh. If we have to keep surviving at one another's expense, we will of course never learn or remember how to live in the hope of one another's well-being. Oh, that's amazing. Patriarchy thrives on human discord. Yes, it does. As a system, it strives to co-opt us all, buy and sell us all, one against the other. At the very heart of this divide and conquer strategy, we must remember, is the colonization of the indigenous female by the imperial male, the usurpation and exploitation of the original female collective by the Bronze Age patriarchal profiteer. Among many third world people still fighting their way out of the rubble of advanced colonialism, and among political minorities in the West generally, there is a terrific suspicion and hostility toward suggestions of any spiritual solution to the world's real problems. This anger and doubt is understandable and thoroughly justified. Frantz Fanon wrote in The Wretched of the Earth, quote, "For centuries, they have stifled almost the whole of humanity in the name of a so-called spiritual experience, End quote. They, of course, refers to the Christian West. The so-called spiritual experience has been that of a dominating European and American male elite with their auxiliary wives and families, which has for 3 centuries proceeded to realize its pathological lust for individual power and enrichment at the expense of the rest of the entire world. Western patriarchy has plundered, raped, co-opted, ripped off, brutalized, and massacred lavishly, always in the name of God. God is always available to justify what cannot otherwise be justified. The Holy Bible itself is the first written explanation of this phenomenon. Western Christians throughout their long, gory history have convinced themselves that the God of the Bible chose them to be spiritual imperialists. Whoo! They have convinced themselves that this God virtually gave them the entire earth to use, to control, to profit from, and in the final insult, to missionize, to teach spirit to, through a rifle barrel if necessary. It is a kind of dematerialized fairy tale Christians have long and wistfully told themselves, that the living earth is not real anyway. So God gave it to them to abstract into wealth, which is quite real. The entire planet, with its exotic varieties of peoples, lands, animals, and resources, have been viewed by Western Christianity as little more than raw material, just waiting to be appropriated and reprocessed by enterprising religious men into an ego-enhancing experience. Because clearly, the God in whose name the West has terrorized the rest of the world has not been a God of spirit, not ever, but a God of inflated patriarchal ego, an ego so full of itself it has always been able to spiritualize, i.e., rationalize as divinely ordained the most blatant robberies and repulsive crimes. The biblically derived capitalist spiritual experience in particular has never been an adventure of spirit, but an indulgence of extreme individualism and self-righteousness in the pursuit of personal profit and personal enhancement, always at the expense of the whole world. for only ego experiences end up amassing profit, i.e., acts of alienation. Genuine spiritual experience is always communal, i.e., an act of communication. Just as Western biblical spirituality has served to rationalize imperialism, it has simultaneously served to stifle political criticism and activity against imperialism. It has been spiritual to colonize, brutalize, and plunder, but not spiritual to talk about it. I.e., spirituality has long been reified into an upper and middle class euphemistic process in which it is considered not polite to discuss the origins of one's wealth. The origins of wealth, of course, are always very bloody. I.e., not nice, in the name of refined sensibility, aka spirituality, aka abstractness. The pursuit of bloody truth is discouraged. The paradigm for this class evasion of the blood origins of wealth lies in the patriarchal evasion of the blood origins of life. Patriarchy shamelessly colonizes, exploits, and brutalizes the female body, and then censors open discussion and criticism of this process in the name of decency and polite society and civilized discourse and all. In both cases, the pretense of spirit is used to cover up the fact of blood. And so, in all those parts of the world that have been ravaged by Western Christian imperialists, experience spirituality has a well-deserved reputation as the emblem of total hypocrisy. This reputation continues into some new age or countercultural attempts at spirituality. Yes, it does. In particular, many activists undergoing political burnout have made a 180 degrees turn to immerse themselves in apolitical spiritual pursuits. Thus reinforcing the euphemistic patriarchal tradition that spirit is above politics. The left hand should know what the right hand is doing. Profit 6 days a week and go to church on Sunday. Ooh, shit. Profit 6 days a week and go to work on Sunday. All being psychological devices to allow people to enjoy the fruits of patriarchal profit systems while avoiding responsibility for their sanguine roots. They all mean, quote, don't look too closely at the origins of your wealth, including the wealth of the spiritual privilege, end quote. For it is true that all spiritual exercise in the Western world is performed on a cushion of wealth. If not one's personal wealth, then the wealth of the one's surrounding culture. And this wealth has been accumulated at the world's expense. For Westerners to leave politics and submerge themselves in apolitical or transpolitical spiritual disciplines may or may not serve personal needs and goals. On the global level, it is merely a continuance of the patriarchal imperialist trick of spiritualizing one's wealth and privilege by not looking too closely at their bloody roots. Oof. Yes, she said that. Yes. Oh my God. It's so true. It is the frustration I feel like most of us are experiencing when we get into these circles with these extra spiritual people who just cannot happen to see the 150 people a day being made homeless in LA, but they're so super spiritual. This perfectly sums up that tendency among those privileged such. Anyway, I'm going to read that last sentence again. That's great. For Westerners to leave politics and submerge themselves in apolitical or transpolitical spiritual disciplines may or may not serve personal needs and goals. On the global level, it is merely a continuance of the patriarchal imperialist trick of spiritualizing one's wealth and privilege by not looking too closely at their bloody roots. Okay? Moreover, this disappearing trick is a lie. Politics is in and of the world, and nobody leaves the world. Spiritual people leave politics only in the sense that rich people leave poverty. But i.e., by being able to afford to fly off to some other place where they don't have to look at it. But poverty, like politics, is in and of the contemporary world, because most people live in poverty and in politics. Not by choice, but by brute force. They have become ontological conditions for the entire world. Nobody escapes them. Some people have the illusion of escaping them. Excuse me. Got an eyelash in my eyeball. Let's see. Nobody escapes them. Some people have the illusion of escaping them for more or less prolonged periods of time. Just as during the incessant plagues, wars, and political upheavals of the early Middle Ages, rich people barricaded themselves into well-stocked castles, while hordes of the sick and starving banged and died at their gates. The feudal rich had the illusion that they could survive as islands of life surrounded by a sea of suffering and death. But not for long. In most cases, the castles were broken into, and the privileged few dragged out to scream and die like everyone else. Yes, just so, in a political world, isolated or separatist, spiritual solutions are doomed. Faced with the pain and challenge of this realization, many spiritually oriented people opt for the spiritually reactionary explanations of the world's suffering. Yes, i.e., that God makes some people poor so that others can learn something from them. That poverty and pain are karmic situations brought on by one's behavior in past lives. That one chooses one's life absolutely, and that some people choose to suffer. Oh. All these explanations are spiritual versions of blaming the victim. They derive from patriarchal religious systems, which were purposely designed to rationalize hierarchies, injustice, and the status quo. Yes, all patriarchal systems are self-justifying. And the mind dwelling within these systems is capable of monstrous rationalizations in order to keep these tautologies intact. These modes of explaining other people's suffering are in a very real way acts of human sacrifice. Faced with a choice or a challenge to our religious mindset, we are willing to sacrifice living human beings, their problems, and their pain in order to keep our worldviews intact. We are literally sacrificing people to our gods. The core of this patriarchal ontology, which separates spirit from matter and proceeds to deny the reality of life in the name of some abstract God or some life-explaining ontological system. All spiritually oriented people are prone to this trap. Oh my God. Are prone to this trap, and it is a trap that we must beware. When our desire and capacity to see the world as a sacred gestalt becomes, on another level, a monstrous justification of what must be, of what not, a monstrous justification of what must not be justified. When fundamentalists and some evangelicals claim that the hydrogen bomb comes from God and that global annihilation via World War III will be a fulfillment of Revelation, a fulfillment not to be avoided at all costs, but to be yearned for, in fact, as the prophesied rapture, most spiritual people are appalled. But many of these same people will turn about and accept without critique Krishna's justification of war in the Bhagavad Gita, where the God tells Arjuna to ride into battle and slay all his relatives without remorse or hesitation, because after all, they are all illusions anyway. and already dead and never born, merely the spinnings of Maya. One myth is prettier to us, more exotic than the other, but in truth, what is the real difference between one patriarchal rationalization of hell and the other? All rationalizations of holy war are not spiritual. They are in fact patriarchal, and we must recognize the difference. By the same token, all spiritual rationalizations of continuous poverty, injustice, and suffering are not spiritual at all, but are in fact patriarchal political justifications for the status quo. And we must know the difference, because women's spirituality in the Western world has been, or has often seemed to be, a cultural luxury of mostly white middle-class women. It too has been accused, quite justly, of lacking a political consciousness, or at least of lacking a political reference. On another level, many lesbian and even hetero feminists who are into the goddess have opted for cultural political separatism. They have left politics and political solutions, that is, by blaming the world's problems on men and then refusing to have anything more to do with the man's world. Let him clean up his own mess, quote unquote. The glaring problem with this separatist solution is that the man's world is still filled with a majority population of women and children. It is women and children doing most of the suffering out there, and to turn one's back on, quote, the man's world is to turn one's back on women and children. A genuine understanding of, quote, the goddess would not allow us to do this. A true ontological experience of the Great Mother and of the complete physical as well as spiritual bonding together of all life on earth would not allow us to turn our backs on, quote, the man's world, for we are in and of that world now, and its suffering is an extension of us, and as we are an extension of it. In a true reliving of the world's first religion, we can make no distinctions between the life of the spirit and the life of the flesh, for they are one. And so, we can make no separation between spirituality and politics. We are this world. We cannot leave it. We can only work to transform it as we transform ourselves in acts of evolution and revolution. The genius of Michael Foucault surely was that he showed us so clearly and so precisely how politics is everything that happens to the body. On earth, mind and spirit are definitively embodied. The notion that mind and spirit can be abstracted from the body is a patriarchal lie. And a continuance of this lie is the notion that we can indulge in a spirituality that is above politics. I hope y'all hearing me. Good Lord. Somehow floats above this spirituality that is above politics, that somehow floats above the agony of this present earth like a little blissed out cloud. The spirit is within a body. It is the conscious experience of process within that body. And the spirit evolves or is obstructed in its evolution, depending on the body's experience of its material environment. It is patriarchy that devalues and disconnects the body from spirit in order to make the body's energy accessible for exploitation. Yes, a feminist spirituality must begin with that fact of being alive as a biological body on a living and conscious biological planet. This is the human ontological condition. This is the condition of all human evolution and all creative human activity. Those who embrace spirituality as an escape from politics, as a transcendence of political exigencies, simply do not understand what feminist spirituality means at its root. The joining of the conscious body and the conscious spirit in the ongoing epiphany of experienced evolution. Whatever represses or deforms the body's experience of itself also represses and deforms the spirit's self-experience. I.e., God does not want millions of human beings to starve and suffer and die so that a select few can undergo a spiritual experience. Woo! Yo, yo, vicious. Baby. She giving you the business right now. She said, God does not want millions of human beings to starve and suffer and die so that a select few can undergo a spiritual experience. Arrogant asses. Anyway, nor does the goddess live solely in an elite separatist in elite separatist retreats, dancing naked in the piney woods under a white and well-fed moon. The goddess at this moment is starving to death in refugee camps with a skeletal child clutched to her dry nipples. The goddess at this moment is undergoing routine strip and squat search inside American prisons. The goddess is on welfare, raising her children in a ghetto next to a freeway interchange that fills their blood cells with neurons and lead. Their blood cells and neurons with lead. The goddess is an 8-year-old girl being used for the special sexual thrills of visiting businessmen in a Brazilian brothel. The goddess is patrolling with a rifle slung over her shoulder, trying to save a revolution in Nicaragua. The goddess is Winnie Mandela in South Africa saying, "Don't push me." i.e., the goddess is the world. The goddess is in the world, and nobody can escape the world. We know this, but we forget it. In this world, at this point, no political revolution is sustainable if it is not also a spiritual revolution, a complete ontological birth of new beings out of the old. Equally, no spiritual activity deserves respect if it is not at the same time a politically oh my God, I cannot believe this. If it is not a politically responsible, i.e. responsive activity. As Julio Cortázar says, the moment comes when a truth becomes clear, a truth simple as it is wonderful, that of saving oneself alone is not saving oneself, or in any case, it doesn't justify us as human beings. End quote. End quote. In this world, at this point, we are at the apogee of the patriarchal project of separating flesh from spirit. Some spokesperson for the patriarchal view are actually telling us that they might have to launch World War III, even if it means annihilating the world in order to, quote, save the American way, our Christian capitalist souls. This thinking represents the outcome of 4,000 years of patriarchal attempts to abstract spiritual from material existence. The only meaningful political direction left now is synonymous with the only meaningful spiritual direction left now, towards the conscious refusion of the spirit and of flesh. This radical step might appear to be a step backwards, but in our movement along a spiral, it is in fact a step forward to the same place we began, but on the path of a larger circle of consciousness. This time it will be a global consciousness of a global oneness, and it will realize itself on a very sophisticated technological stage, with perhaps a total merger of psychic and electronic activity. When Steve Biko defined the vision of Black consciousness in Africa as a quest for true humanity, as a desire to define human beings as ends in ourselves, not as a means for technological development, not as mere units or functions of this economic system or that political system, not as an extension of a broom or pushable buttons on a machine, but as the determination of the Black to rise and attain the envisioned self. He was articulating a spiritual vision as well as a political vision. and his articulation must be applied to all the world's people. The envisioned self is the next stage in human evolution, and it will be born explicitly from the refusion of experienced spirit and experienced flesh, not as a means toward any externally established end, but as a consciously perceived process of evolution unfolding itself. The primary urge of patriarchy has been to control and repress life towards some profitable end, rather than to allow this self-perceiving unfolding to occur. All genuine and successful revolts against patriarchy will be conjoined spiritual political revolts. Yes, 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 yes. This is why the great political revolutionaries who end up being killed, assassinated for one ostensible reason or another are inevitably the people who most appeal to the spirit. They are the vanguard of the inevitable refusion of the spiritual and material worlds. And even though they sometimes do not realize this themselves, i.e. Martin Luther King was a Christian, Che Guevara was a Marxist, Malcolm was a Muslim, their presences, their beings vibrate with this ontologically matriarchal refusion. For it is only within the goddess that sexual flesh and conscious cosmic spirit can become one. Steve Biko was murdered by the South African Security Police in 1977. As the future rapidly unfolds, there will undoubtedly appear more and more female martyrs of the conjoined flesh and spirit, until this entire world understands that this is the next inevitable evolutionary step that all must take. Oh, my God. The fundamentalists have confused us and have attracted many confused people with their commercial revival of the old mechanistic moralistic God. They have successfully integrated their literist Bible God with the resurgent neoconservative economics and politics, quite brazenly offering the patriarchal cause of so many world problems as the reborn solution. Woo! While people all over the world, especially young people, are risking and giving their lives to fight for the envisioned self, a true humanity, the American fundamentalist preachers and politicians are trying very hard to make humanism a dirty word. This is the result of their Bronze Age religious heritage, in which every day, fleshy, earthly reality had to be demonized in order to make spirit the property of an elite few. Also, perhaps the humanism that they see in their own mirrors is not worthy of much respect. The secular humanist liberals have also contributed to the problem. Striving to maintain the constitutional separation of church and state, they have passed decades constructed program after program, government-funded housing, food commodities, food stamps, job training and retraining programs, etc., in which the minimal needs of the body are met along with a massive disregard for the human spirit. Liberal programs failed because they are built in spiritual deadness. Like many Marxists and socialists, American liberals fell into the trap of confusing spirituality with religion. Because we have all been trained by 4,000 years of patriarchal dichotomizing to believe that being spiritual is qualitatively different from being human, we refuse to see the spirit at work in so many third world humanist political movements. Oh my God in heaven. For the same reason, so many people are overawed by the expensive, if tacky, religiosity, this woman, hyper-religiosity of the modern television preachers or salesmen of God. The soaring, glassy churches, the golden Bibles, the patriotically positive teeth and perfect hairdos, choirs of shimmering otherworldly polyester. This definitely isn't real life. So it must be spiritual. When the fundamentalists revive biblical arrogance in their claim to have a denominational hotline to God, the preposterousness is believed by millions and millions of people. This is how far we have fallen, disconnected from our primal recognition of the spirit in all living things. Blatantly commercialist power mongering can claim to be conversation with the cosmic spirit and be believed. True humanism, primal spirituality, and the energy of evolution must join together in a conscious force to tell the truth about God and life. I'm gonna warn you guys, my phone is dying. I might not finish this tonight. I only have a few pages left. The truth is that God is not in a book, holy, golden, or otherwise. God is not in a church, a cathedral, a synagogue, a mosque. God is not cemented inside any man-made theological system or elitist cultural architecture. God is definitely not bursting neck veins of righteously profitable baloney at you from the TV screen. God is not for sale, even to the highest bidder, no matter how much it indulges in nationalistic flag waving and bellicosity of world power. God is the universe. We are all now living inside the body of God. I will try to make it, brother, I promise. There is nowhere to go get there. We are already here. There is nowhere to go to get outside of God. There is just a forgetting of this truth. It is impossible not to be living right now and always within God's body. It is only possible to be aware or unaware of this fact. Religions that try to block or repudiate our awareness of this cosmic fact must themselves be repudiated. Religions that try to cut us off from our long evolutionary past, moralistic, mechanistic dogmas that deny our billions of years of passionate, heroic survival crawling up from the first cell through the genetic adventures of algae, fish, land plants, insects, reptiles, birds, mammals to the complex human consciousness of now, must themselves be denied. Such religions give us a cardboard definition of life that keeps us always lonely and alienated, cut off from the creative energy and integrity of the earth's biological imagination. Religions that curse and distort our past as rooted in some dark, savage evil, which, they say, can only be expiated by lifetimes of guilt and suffering, must be repudiated. They cut us off from ourselves, from our origins, and our destiny as creative children of an infinitely creative universe. To reduce us to something sinful is to reduce us to something exploitable. The religions of guilt, sin, and fear tell lies to us about who we are in order to mechanize and exploit our beings. Religious systems that support any kind of domination, submission, social structures, primate religions that preach holy hierarchies based on sex, race, caste, ethnic or religious, economic or political distinctions must be utterly repudiated. Such religions are not visions of God, but vampire mercenaries that keep themselves empowered by eating our human energies and our souls, by reinforcing primate mechanisms on our unique human species. They obstruct and deform our evolution. They are counter-evolutionary. All religions that attempt to, quote, explain human suffering, injustice, hunger, and poverty as manifestations of God's will must be totally repudiated. Such religions do not speak for God. They merely reiterate patriarchal rationalizations for the status quo. Such rationalizations are all self-serving for the people in power, and therefore lies told to the rest of us. Biology makes mistakes. It does not lie. We need a new global spirituality, an organic spirituality that belongs innately to all of us as the children of the earth. A genuine spirituality that utterly refutes the moralistic, manipulative, patriarchal systems, the mechanistic religions that seek to divide us, that control and oppress us by successfully dividing us. We need a spirituality that acknowledges our earthly roots as evolutionary and sexual beings, just as we need an ontology that acknowledges Earth as a conscious spiritual being. We need this organic global spirituality because we are all ready to let's see, because we are ready to evolve as a globally conscious species. We are at the point where we must evolve or die. In a chilling book published in 1972 called The 20th Century Book of the Dead, Gil Elliot compiled statistics of all the ways we know how to die. In the 20th century alone, according to Elliot, there have been 110 million man-made deaths, including 62 million by various forms of privation, death camps, slave labor, forced marches, imprisonment. 46 million deaths from guns and bombs, and 2 million from chemicals. We are living in a world that practices the politics of death. And these numbers are 15 years old. Add all the wars, political murders, man-made famines since 1972. It is patriarchy that practices the politics of death. Included in these figures should be the actual deaths, perhaps also the living deaths. All of those. Ooh, I gotta go, y'all. This phone is about to die. I'm gonna charge it, try to anyway, and I'll pick back up tonight. Sorry. This is Yapo Mayende and Gina. I've got like 4 pages left. Ride with me. I'll be back in a few.